Well, you know, I did an interview with Margaret O'Brien, and it was, what was so striking to me was we were talking about crying, and she was talking about one tear, if you hold back, she said, you know, it was difficult, but a lot of times the directors would want one tear to fall and the other one to hold back, and you can't even imagine how a child could even do that.
I can't. I mean, I was always mind-boggled by Margaret O'Brien, because actually Margaret's film, the first film, Journey for Margaret, she was, before that, she was going to do a film that I was in called My Friend Flicker, and they released her to do Journey for Margaret, which made her into Margaret O'Brien. And I have, to this day, I can't figure out where that gift came from. It's astonishing. Jackie Cooper also had the most incredible adult, or seemingly incredible adult understanding of his craft as a child. I mean, it's astonishing. It's absolutely wonderful. You know, when you're talking about when Bob Mitchum saying it take 17...
21 people go into every actor.
The first actress I ever saw in a movie was Irene Dunne, and the film was Roberta. And so I was very young. I was living in England. I was probably about 7. And so immediately, of course, I fell desperately in love with her and remained desperately in love with her for the rest of her life. A few years later, or about 8 years later, I played her son in a film called The White Cliffs of Dover, which is a wonderful movie. And I could hardly, my armpits flowed. I was so nervous, and I loved her so. And she knew it, and she was an extraordinary person. She was a wonderful woman, and everything one would expect her to be from the movie. That was Irene Dunne. And now the film was made in 1944, which means that Irene would have been close to 50, looking, I mean, absolutely ravishing. And one day I noticed that there was a little man who had a little light like that, see? And he followed her everywhere. It was like this spot, so that it was just taking, but it was just on her. Okay? I said, these devices that were used, have you heard of a thing called the OB? Mm-hmm. You know where that comes from? The OB was a series of like tiny footlights around the camera, right? And they could turn just around the lens. It was invented for Merle Oberon, because she had makeup poisoning, and she was pitted. Merle was pitted here. And that was really quite an extraordinary device. It's interesting to sort of ponder on today which one of those women would have had the same sort of success in modern filmmaking, because the industry that went into turning everything into a perfection was phenomenal. I'm not sure. Jean Arthur is one of the most extraordinary original talents I've ever seen. I mean, she was phenomenal. If she came along today, I don't know whether there would be the space to allow her the time to become Jean Arthur. And that's what's fascinating to me.
That was what was fascinating, what Janet said. She said that even when when they would write in Variety, Janet Leigh was you didn't have to put in parentheses what movie. She said now people's careers are so short that if you mention an actress, unless it's one of like the top 6, you have to put in parentheses the movie, or they do put in parentheses so that you'll connect. Oh yeah, that's who we mean. Laura Dern. Oh, who was that? Because
well, it isn't even a matter of the careers being so short. When somebody makes an immense impact today, it's usually, well, let me put it this way. When I was put in How Green Was My Valley at 12 years old, I looked about 8, but I was 12 years old. As the rushes came through, apparently, I mean, looking back on it and analyzing it, they must have realized, well, they thought they had something. In 1941, I made 5 films, 3 of them at the same time. So by the time How Green Was My Valley came out, there were two more that I was involved in. So if the film had been a big flop, then they probably just would have, all right, tossed the kid away. However, the film was a huge success. And if that happened today, that child would not have been seen. Another film wouldn't have even been started until How Green Was My Valley was out, because they weren't thinking in that way. So all those teams of people, I mean, when you think everybody in that studio system, they had their own, if you were successful, if you were a cartel, they had their own makeup people, their own publicity people, own hairdresser. Everything was a unit to keep that commodity intact for as long as it was successful.